So this is the Salesforce Architect Group for Jacksonville, United States. I'm your leader, Andy Utkan, and this is our third meeting. Actually, as most of you know, Architect Trailblazer user groups are rather new, and we started this one mid last year. And now our guest today is Joey, and he's going to tell us all about Mulesoft and Mulesoft Composer. Joey is an MVP and the founder of Cloud Jedi Solutions. He's been an MVP for a very long time. He does a lot of things for the community. And when you look up Mulesoft Composer, he is one of the people out there. So I appreciate his contribution a lot. Thank you very much for joining us today, Joey. Take it away, please.
Thank you, Adi, for having me here. So I'll just wait for the sharing.
Are you able to share now?
Yep.
Okay,
Can
awesome.
you see it now?
Take it away. Yes.
There you go. All right. First of all, thank you again for having me, Andy. It's a privilege to be able to talk to you as architects. So it's interesting how the architect group is literally fairly new compared to the other Trailblazer community groups, right? But it's definitely a privilege and much needed in the community. So I am Joey Chan. So here today, I'll be talking to you about how you can connect systems without code using Mulesoft Composer. So just to give you a bit more background about myself, so I've actually been a Salesforce MVP, and it's currently my third year this year, and I'm also a Mulesoft mentor, and also a hyper automation advisor. So I'm the founder and technical architect at Cloud Jedi Solutions, and been privileged to be #1 rated on the App Exchange as a developer. And I'm also 26 times Salesforce certified and 4 times Mulesoft certified. I've also been gone through the automation go-to-market champion for Mulesoft, and I also lead a community group here in the Philippines for the admin, and also one of the organizers for the Philippines Dreamin' and Southeast Asia Dreamin'. So first of all, what is the problem right now with the IT landscape? So one of the biggest things that we have in different businesses is there are so much business demands, different automation requirements, whether it's using AI, using different SaaS applications, mobile and analytics implementations, right? The problem there is we only have so much IT delivery capacity. It's not really feasible for us to keep on hiring more people in order to keep on in order to meet the demands, right? So this is what we call the delivery capacity, and then this is what we call the transformation delivery gap. In a way, as the business grows, there's going to be more and more demands for the business, right? The question is, how do we then address this problem? One of the main key aspects that Salesforce is pushing forward is empowering the users, especially the business users and admins, to be able to implement functionalities themselves without necessarily having to offload the work to the IT team, right? So many of these are tools like, for example, Salesforce Flows, are actually replacing the need for developers in certain aspects. So when I say certain aspects, it's usually things that normally would be required to be done in Apex can now be done in Flows, right? So many of you would be familiar with automations like Salesforce Flows, right? So Andy has been talking about that quite a lot. So he has a course for it. So whenever we talk about automation within Salesforce, right now the key point is really focusing on Salesforce Flows, right? We used to use workflow rules and process builder, but now it's really the main tool for the job is really the flow builder. But then the question is, what do we then use if we need to automate outside Salesforce, right? So when we need to trigger things like, say, from other system like NetSuite, let's say from Jira. So Mulesoft Composer is actually the tool that we can use in order to help with that. So the question is, what is Mulesoft Composer? So it's basically a tool that you can use in order to create integrations between systems. So take note, it's not just limited to using automation based on Salesforce events. It can also be triggered based on events, let's say, coming from NetSuite. So let's say a record gets created in NetSuite and you want to sync that data over to Salesforce, or do you want to send a Slack message, or if you want to send a text message using Twilio. Those are all possible. So we'll be going through some of those use cases later. So who is it for, right? So the main audience for this specific product is actually Salesforce admins and business users. So, but at the same time, all of these different personas can actually benefit from this, knowing this tool. So, for example, for the most part, nowadays Salesforce admins are really expected to learn flows, right? Because this is the main automation tool for Salesforce. Usually, in the past, whenever you need to, let's say, interact with another system, that's usually handled by more technical folks, right? So usually you either have to work with a developer or let's say integration developer in order to build out integration. So Mulesoft Composer is actually empowering admins to be able to create basic integrations on their own without necessarily working with um, having IT to work on those projects, right? And then for Salesforce architects, this is actually also a great benefit because in a way, knowing and understanding all of the different options for integration and knowing the capabilities of Mulesoft Composer, and also at the same time the limitations of what is cannot do, and knowing when it's not supposed to be used is also very important. For Salesforce developers, we actually used to build a lot of point-to-point integrations, especially for the small businesses. So in a way, understanding that, let's say, they may not necessarily have the budget for a middleware like MuleSoft, and depending on integration requirements, we used to actually need to build integrations using Apex. So in a way, knowing that, hey, this is now something that we can use rather than building everything in code, right? Even Salesforce marketers can actually benefit from this. So let's say something is happening in your ERP, or let's say NetSuite. So we can send that data over to Marketing Cloud and have some automations trigger from there. And as a Salesforce consultant, similar to admins, knowing the capabilities should actually help in terms of implementing requirements. So without further ado, we'll go through the demo use cases. And then after that, we'll go through the rest of the consideration. So in this specific demo, I'll go through a simple use case wherein we actually have a high value client. And what we'd simply like is we want to be able to send a notification because it's the client's birthday. So first is we want to send a Slack message to the account executive just to make sure that we can prepare a nice gift. And then the other one is actually being able to send a greeting via SMS using Twilio to the client. So if they have a mobile phone. So we'll go ahead and do this. So first of all, first of all, this is actually Mulesoft Composer. So you'll see that it's actually embedded within Salesforce. There's actually two versions of Mulesoft Composer. One is simply the standalone Mulesoft Composer, and the other one is Mulesoft Composer for Salesforce. It's basically the same underlying functionality, but the other option is actually for those that are not Salesforce customers so that they can still use it. But for most Salesforce customers, this is likely the one that they'll be using. That way, it's all embedded within Salesforce. So from here, we have the Mulesoft Composer. One thing to take note, even though it's embedded, it's actually running on what we call the Anypoint platform. So this is the Mulesoft Anypoint platform that has been there for years now. And if you actually look into the composer flows, let's say if we create a new flow, this is actually an iframe. Let me wait for it to load. If you were to look at the view frame source, you'll see that it's actually referencing EU1 composer.mulesoft.com. Actually, it's running on Cloud Hub 2.0. So it's actually one of the newer functionalities of Mulesoft, and basically it's all running in the cloud. So imagine this is one instance of Mulesoft. And then from here, we're trying to create a new composer. So similar to flows, you basically have to tell it what would trigger this specific flow. You can either use a system event or a scheduler. So system event, you could think about it as record triggered flows. So let's say something happens within the system, and take note, this can be a number of different systems, not just Salesforce. And then scheduler, basically it could be running every hour, every day, or every 7 days. There are multiple different options. So just to give you an idea on what are the options here. So these are actually all of the different system events that you can look at. So for example, you could trigger a flow to run whenever an email comes in. One use case here is, let's say you receive an email that contains an attachment. So later on, I'll be talking about an automation package that includes Mulesoft RPA, wherein you could actually get that attachment. Let's say it could be an invoice. And then you could actually read the file, understand what it is, and actually send that to another system. Let's say I want to import this automatically to my ERP system, or even in Salesforce. I want to create an opportunity record with line items based on this. So these are actually possible. Although take note, this may be a combination of Composer, RPA, and the Anypoint. We could also use Google Sheets as the system event. So let's say most of us have probably used Google Forms and Google Sheets at some point. So you could actually trigger it, let's say, on a new record. I want you to create some automation based on this. We could also connect with HubSpot, Marketo, and all of these other tools. So of course, one of the most popular ones is basically Salesforce. So in a way, it's actually listening for changes. For example, let's try this. So right now, we're already connected to this specific Salesforce org. And take note, we could either listen for a new record, new or updated, or deleted records. The way this actually works is that it's actually using what we call a polling mechanism. So the SLA is basically up to 10 minutes. But what the system does is try to check, hey, do we have any new records for this object? So let's say it could be an account, and then we can then trigger different actions based on that. So we have to refresh. But we won't be using this for this specific demo. So going back, delete step. So what we'll do, at least for this specific demo, is actually use a scheduler. So one thing that you'll see here is we have different options in terms of scheduling it. So 15, 30 minutes, 45 on hour, 5 hours. So these are the different options. One consideration that you have is, let's say, if you need to run something every day at a specific time, there's currently no option of actually telling the system to do that. Let's say if you wanted to run daily at 9 a.m., you actually have to go in and select every day, and then you actually have to activate it exactly at 9 a.m. for it to run during that time. So just some considerations that you have keep in mind. So I'll just name this Sunville. And then from here, take note, this will run daily, right? Once we activate it. The next step is, what do we then want to do once it basically fires? So we have different options here. So we can either use a system action, meaning looking into different apps, or we could also use conditional logic like if else block or for each, right? So from here, let me just give you a quick background on the test data that I've created. So I've actually created a contact with a certain birth date. So I've changed the month and the day to the current day. And then birthday would be 1980. And then on top of that, I also created a new custom field called is birthday. So what it simply does is simply looking at the month and the day just to see if it matches up with the today's date. So if we were to do a quick query, from contact. So using this, so we have one record here. And then what we'll do is basically tell the system, okay, now that it's going to run daily, we then select the system action. We tell it, I want to query the data from Salesforce. So in this case, we'll want to use Salesforce as the data source. In this case, I'm already connected to this. We tell it, hey, I want to get the record. So in this case, I want to get the contact records. For this one, as a best practice, we want to only select the fields that we need. By default, it's actually selecting everything. So I'll take this out. I'll take the ID, the name. Let's maybe get the first name, full name, last name. And then I'll also need the mobile phone since we'll be sending a text message later on. And then we'll also want to check, is it the birthday? It can be either be true or false. So hit apply. One very important thing to take note is that whenever, let's say, you're adding new fields, you have to make sure that you're actually clicking this in order to refresh it. So remember, it's actually running on a separate server. So in a way, you have to tell it, hey, I want you to fetch the fields again. And then from here, we add conditions. I want to only process the ones that has a birthday of today. Is birthday equal to true? And then the mobile phone is not that. Mobile phone is not empty. All right. We'll just go ahead and save this first, and then let's just do a quick test just to make sure that it runs correctly. So what's happening in the background is it's technically running on that server, right? So it takes a bit of time to actually go through the process. But what you'll see here is that similar to the debugger, so we can actually see the output. So in this case, the test finished, and you'll see that this specific scheduler ran, and then at this point, you'll see record 1 of 1. So it actually fetched this specific record. So if there are multiple records, you should still be able to see all of those here too. And then next part is what do we then want to do with this data? So the way it works is that whenever this specific query runs, it's actually giving a list of contacts, even if there's only one record here. So what we have to do is we'll actually have to go through the for each loop. So because the thing is, there can be one or more records here, right? So what we'll do is we'll tell it, okay, I want you to go through the list of contacts that we got from this step. And then from here, one very important to take note is you'd want to distinguish between this plus sign here and this one, because this one is going to be an action based on the list of contacts. This specific plus button is going to be an action that runs after the for each loop, right? So we'll want to go through the list of contacts, this, and then from here, we'll just want to send a quick Slack message to the AE, for example. So we'll choose Slack. The way it works is that you simply have to log in to a Slack connection. So we can choose this, but we won't be going through that. You simply have to do an auth. So from here, I'll just use the connection that I've already created here. And then we have different options here, like getting a user by the email, posting a message to a channel. In this case, I'll just send a direct message to myself. And then from here, hold on, we can pick from a list. So I'll just select myself. And then from here, there's actually a language called Data Weave. And this is basically somewhat similar to formula fields. So from here, we can actually either hard code something, the birthday, or we can actually use a custom expression. So from here, you'll see some familiar formulas. So depending on your experience. So basically, you could think about this as a subset of what we call data weave. Data weave is actually a data transformation language developed by Mulesoft. It used to be proprietary, but it's actually now open source. So in a way, these are used for data transformation. Let's say if you want to transform some data from XML to JSON, or if you want to make change some data points. So it's actually quite flexible. And for those Apex developers out there, there's actually I believe it's now in beta. You can now use some functions of data weave in Apex. So from here, we'll just send a message to the AE. Make sure to send a birthday message and a nice gift too. And then we'll just do a quick merge field here. We'll select the name. So we'll just grab the full name. And then let's say if you want to use the different functions here, let's look at, let's say, the string functions. So there's upper, just for you to be able to see how it looks like. We'll put the name back in. So this will then transform the full name to capital letters. And then from there, make sure to hit save. We actually don't need the bot name and the icon URL. And then we can do a quick test again. And then after this, we'll just go through the last step, which is sending a text message to the actual recipient.
So while you're waiting for the test, Joey, a quick question.
Yep.
In this query, do you always get a collection? Can you get the first record, or is it always a collection?
It is always going to be a collection, like
Okay.
a list. Yes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So you'll notice that it actually ran, sent something to the channel ID. So this is what we have as test, right? So this actually sent a Slack message immediately to myself. So going back, we'll keep on adding more to this. So from here, we can also send a quick text message to the actual recipient. All we have to do is going through a system action. There is already an existing connector. Take note, when you say connector, these are pre-built components developed by Mulesoft that allows you to connect to these different systems without that much hassles. One very important to take note is that, let's say if you're actually connecting to a system that isn't listed here, there's always also the option of using the standard HTTP request. So the main thing about this is if let's say you're integrating with an internal system or something that doesn't have a dedicated connector, you could use this. One very important to take note, it actually only processes JSON formats. So if you're using XML, it won't work. And then from here, the next step is actually, for example, we'll want to send a message using Twilio. So in this case, I've actually already added this, but just to give you an idea. So what we need is actually the account SID and OAuth token. So for those that aren't familiar or haven't used Twilio, this is something interesting that you could try out. You could actually sign up for a free account. And something interesting here is it only costs, let's say if you want to get your own phone number, it only costs $1 per month. And if you want to test out the functionality to, let's say, send a text message or using a phone call to a US-based number, it only costs 1 cent each. So in this case, if you want to create a new connection, just copy the account SID and OAuth token. And then I won't be doing that anymore since I already have it here. So we'll just use this. And then we have the option of making a phone call or sending a text message. So we'll just use this. And then remember, we actually grabbed the mobile phone number from the contact, right? So we'll just select this. Let me just quickly check. Mobile phone. We have this as a mobile phone number. And then for the from field, we actually need to use the number from the Twilio. So copy this and then here. And then this is where we'll be sending the greeting to the actual client. So happy birthday. And then we'll just use the first name this time. Hope you have a great day. It's just validating the syntax. I'll hit apply. We don't need the media URL. And then I'll just do a quick test again. So for this part of the testing, I'm actually using Google Voice to receive this. So let's just wait for it to finish. Any questions so far?
I think we have a question about the cost, but we'll get to that, right?
Yep, we
Yeah,
will. We'll
I have-
actually have some slides here. Yes.
I have so many questions, but I'm waiting until you get through.
Yep. All right. Go ahead. So now we're actually finished here. So you'll notice it's a check mark. So it actually already sent this. And here's our Google Voice. And you see here, this is actually the test that we just did now. All right. So do you want to go through some of the questions now, or should we go through some of the other slides? So
As you wish. It's up to you.
sure. I can address some questions now, and then I'll just mention if it's going to be part of the other slides. Go ahead.
So, any questions about other than the cost about the demo?
I do. I have a question.
Okay.
So this is the first time I've seen Mulesoft, and my mind's kind of blown because I'm thinking about all kinds of things that this could help me do. My first question would be, I think you kind of touched on it, where you have the sort of like the pre-built apps that you can connect to.
Mm-hmm.
Do all of those connect by OAuth? Is that how they're connecting?
It depends on the service, but most of it, yeah, I believe so. Yes.
Most of them, okay. And then if you have something else that's not one of those, like apps that Mulesoft has built to connect with, it's possible to connect through it, but you would do it through that HTTP function you were showing.
Correct. Yes, you'll be using this.
Okay. I'm trying to remember what my other question was. Maybe you can talk on the cost and I'll process that a second and see if I remember my other
it's okay.
question.
Well, now that you mentioned the HTTP, this is the one that the product team for Flow gave us in beta form, right? Is, obviously this is more powerful because I think we can only do get in the beta one for now. Or was it
Yep,
post?
you're
I have
talking
to check.
about you're talking
The,
about the flows, are you?
inside the flow builder now we have the HTTP call out in Spring 23 in beta form. But that's obviously this is the full capability with get, post, put, and everything that's in here.
Mm-hmm.
Does that facilitate also? Does it have some kind of assistance in terms of trying to process what a typical JSON response would be here, or you just need to do that yourself?
It actually does, yes. So the way it works is so let's say you're doing a JSON GET request, right? Normally, you'd actually need to provide it a sample request and a sample response here, because the way it works is let's say sample JSON format. So this is actually a sample of JSON format, right? So in a way, there's a certain structure there in order for you to get to the name, salary, and married. You have to go through this employee. So this is actually, if you were to copy and paste this then tells it, okay, I want to get it from this specific employee, and then usually it's denoted by employee.name. So that's actually how it figures out that, hey, I'm expecting this specific format.
Yeah.
So you copy that and then paste this as a sample request.
That creates the resources for you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sounds
in
good.
the background, you could think about it like it's actually creating variables in the back end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that later on, you could actually use this for the next steps. So sample is actually sample
Awesome.
response. All right. I'll talk through that. We actually have a slide for that. Although take note, of course, pricing is best in general, it's best discussed with your AE, but they did actually give some guidance in terms of the list price. So I'll be talking about that.
Okay.
Kind of limitation on number of records. For instance, if you're processing, for instance, if there is an external system, let's consider ShipStation, right? And we want to process 40,000 orders in a single call. So is there any kind of limitation right now that we should be aware of when it comes to Mulesoft?
At least in terms of limitation, there's nothing specific. But then one very important thing to note, it's not really meant for really, really large data sets.
Okay.
So you have to consider, because I'll be talking about different mechanisms later on, because this is really meant for business business users in a way, and admins too, right? In a way, they're actually trying to make it as simple as possible. And that the thing about this is you don't really have that much options in terms of proper error handling. Let's say if it fails on a certain aspect, what do you do and do, right? So you'll notice that they're trying to make it as simple as possible, but at the same time, if you're really dealing with really large data sets, large data volumes, definitely consider other tools also. I mean, even if it may be able to do, it's highly likely that this is not necessarily the best tool for the job. Let's say if you're moving large amounts of data, you may consider an actual ETL tool, right? So those are some of the considerations as architects. Hopefully that helps.
Yes, thank you.
I
So
remembered my
yep.
sorry,
Go
I
ahead.
remembered my other question really quick. So just so I'm kind of understanding the use cases on each side, a lot of these connectors that are already there we use at my company. Are you able to pull data from one to update data on the other side or sync it together, or is it simply for just saying, hey, trigger this or send a message or whatever? Like, can you do field updates?
Yes. So basically, you're asking about a scenario where we want to get data from one system and then move it to the other side. Is that right?
Like, for example, we're trying to solve a problem where we have some of our support people working in ServiceNow. We have another team that's working in Jira, and we have our customer support reps are in Salesforce, and they all want to work in their own system they're used to, but they all need a little bit of information from everybody else. So, like, I noticed all three of those are available there as connections. So I'm trying to kind of understand, like, hey, is it possible to say, okay, this is the ServiceNow ticket and maybe this field or this field that's relevant, and bring that into one of the other systems? Like, we're trying to kind of solve for everybody wants to stay in their own, but everybody needs to see it.
Yep. It depends on what the source is, but in general, yes. So if you want something that basically if you want Mulesoft Composer to be able to listen to changes in Jira, that's possible. And then if you want that to then get sent to cases in Salesforce, that's also possible. So make sure to check the system to see if it's supported. So take note, you'll have more options in terms of action. So this one is the one that triggers what happens. So as you mentioned, let's see, you have Jira here. I don't actually have a Jira account, but this is something that you can explore further. But quick answer for you is you could have it triggered from another system and then do whatever you want with it. Does that help?
Okay.
So you're not limited to this specific instance.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
All right. One very important to take note is that whenever a customer buys Mulesoft Composer, you're actually assigned one and only one instance of Composer. I'm not sure if that's going to change later on, but in a way, that's a very, very big consideration because we're mostly used to developing things in the sandbox, but there's actually no concept of sandbox for Mulesoft Composer. You're basically developing everything directly in production. One way, of course, as a best practice, we shouldn't develop directly in production. The way you actually handle that using Mulesoft Composer is you actually need to make sure that you have proper naming convention. So for example, if you're connecting to Salesforce, you actually have to tell it, hey, am I connecting to a sandbox or a production? And then make sure to add those details. Hey, which sandbox it is, and is it also connecting to the production, right? So the way it works is that let's just go back to the flow that we just created. The way it works is that you first have to develop everything in sandbox, right? Make sure that you're actually pointing to sandbox environments when you're testing. Once you're done, the way you actually deal with that is you simply have to change the connection that you're using. Let me just quickly show it to you. So from here, assuming we've already tested that, so there's this option here to change the connection. So you'll have to just switch to the production once you're ready, right? And then going back to the slides, any other questions before we go through?
I think Rich has a question. Rich, can you come off mute and ask, please?
Yeah, sort of a technical question, but
Yeah.
I looked at the HTTP and was trying to connect to a system that isn't technically OAuth, but it has the client ID in secret, and then they send back a bearer token, and then you got to use the bearer token. But it doesn't really fit perfectly into the few HTTP models that I could find. Is there a way to like not be forced into the HTTP connection out of the box and like just do your own posts with body and headers and do kind of like your own kind of complex customized um post to get the bearer token back and then use the bearer token in a future um piece. I know that Salesforce is obviously trying to hit the major ones, OAuth and things like that, but there's a lot of, as you mentioned, this is kind of aimed at small mid-sized companies, right?
Mhm.
There's a lot of tools that they use, and those tools don't necessarily have the best APIs to them sometimes. It's a
Right.
startup and they're kind of doing things in interesting ways. And so, yeah, I kind of ran
Yep.
into that limitation. I'm not sure if there's a way to handle that.
Just to confirm, did you use Composer for that?
Yes, yeah, I was
Or
trying
okay.
to. I couldn't.
All
I
right.
couldn't connect to the other system though, so
All right.
couldn't
There
really get it
are
going.
I've seen several different variations of that. So remember, right now based on what I've seen is it only supports JSON. So if
Mhm.
it's not
Yeah,
returning
it
that
was
token
a
as
JSON. Yeah, it was a JSON token, but it was just
just a
it was
string,
just
simple string.
yeah, the process. I mean, I guess could I do like a no auth type post and then change my body and headers and put like a client ID and secret in the header and something like that to get back the bearer token?
It depends on the API. I've
Okay.
seen some implementation wherein you could send us additional parameters on the request so that it gives you back the token in the headers or wherever it is that you can store rather than in the response body, and then from there you can then use that for succeeding implementations. Or another option that I've seen is they've actually used Anypoint platform to do the processing and then go from there. So in a way, there are multiple ways to deal with that. Yeah, we can
But
definitely talk about that further.
any point platform would be another license at that point beyond
Um,
Composer.
it depends on which version of Composer that you get. There's actually two main
Okay.
options. One contains a package called I believe it's Automation Everywhere. So bundle. So they call it Automation Everywhere bundle. So what it contains is Composer, RPA, and any 0.5B course of the endpoint platform. So you can also use that to do the additional, more complicated processing. But the other option is simply buying Composer, which is something separate that you can still do. But for the most part, most companies would be using the bundle. All right.
Gotcha.
I'll be talking about that later on. So.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have another question, but let's
Mhm.
continue and then we'll answer those a little bit later.
Sure. All right. So right now, we actually rather than 24, I believe last time I checked, there's around 26 connectors. So we have Salesforce, NetSuite, Jira, Marketing Cloud, a lot of the Slack. Of course, Slack is going to be there, and Stripe. So let's say if you're charging someone or basically any connection with Stripe, we have all of these options. And as I mentioned, you can also use this HTTP request for those apps that aren't listed here. And then why should actually we be using Composer versus all of the other alternatives, right? Of course, Mulesoft Composer is not the only one in the space. There are actually quite a number of options. One of the more popular ones are, let's say, Zapier. And one thing I've used also is Integromat or Make.com. The main part about this is actually security, right? So in a way, if you think about it, for let's say medium to larger enterprises, they care so much about security. Would you want just any one of your users to be able to create that? So in a way, Mulesoft Composer has, in a way, its governance. So let's say only certain users can actually use this tool, right? So that's one option. And then also flexibility. In a way, I'll be talking about how it's actually built in terms of consumption. It's basically usage based. So depending on what you need, so you could buy a block of credits each year, and then you use that across the year. It's also scalable in a way that it's meant to handle different use cases, and it can definitely grow because it's actually based on the Anypoint platform, but also consider the different tools, right? So as I mentioned, if let's say if we're talking about hundreds of thousands of records or millions of records, definitely consider that, because at the same time, we're talking about consumption-based pricing. So meaning it may not be the best tool for the job, all right? It's also what we call a central hub for end-to-end automation. Take note, I'm referring to the Mulesoft Automate package, or the Salesforce Automation Editor. So this specific product, combined with Salesforce Flows, combined with RPA and the Anypoint platform, actually is what we call a complete automation solution. A large part of it is brought about by what we call RPA. So whenever we're talking about legacy systems, so typically, let's say if you've seen some banks wherein they're still using those black screens, like something like a console, those things can also be automated using RPA. You could think about that like integrating with systems that doesn't have an API. So what we call screen-based automation. So it could be looking at the screen, looking for a certain input field. Okay, where's the username field? Where's the label with the username? And then find the text box next to it, type in the username, and things like that. So just to give an idea. And then why should we consider Composer or the Anypoint platform? So just to give you more context, the Anypoint platform is basically the more complex platform for integrations. So in a way, it's what we call an ESP. So some people may be familiar with terms like ETL and ESP. Whenever we're talking about ETL, it's what we call extract, transform, and load. So meaning we're getting a large set of data from one system and then moving it to another. One example of this would be Informatica and Jitterbit. And for the ESP, basically, this is actually meant for, ESP stands for Enterprise Service Bus. It's actually meant for what we call real-time integrations. So let's say something happens in Salesforce and then it uses a platform event. You then do something else based on that. So in a way, these are meant for larger implementations wherein you're actually connecting multiple different systems. We're talking about be like 10, 20, or 50 different systems, or even hundreds or thousands of different APIs that we need to connect to. So those are things that Mulesoft Anypoint platform can support. So one of the biggest things is the target audience. Who's going to be using this specific product, right? Is it actually business users or admins or non-technical folks, or are we talking about architects or developers? So depending on the use case and the purpose of the integration, you may consider using Composer or the Anypoint platform. So it's also very important to understand how many systems are we connecting to. So are we simply connecting to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different systems? Or are we talking about 20, 30, 50 different systems, right? Whenever we're talking about point-to-point, it's basically connecting Salesforce, let's say, with Twilio, right? And not using middleware. API-led connectivity is a concept that that's not limited to Mulesoft and Anypoint platform. It's something industry-wide that's being used, although called in different names. But basically, this is how you actually create a structure in terms of your implementations to make sure that they're actually reusable. So similar to development in coding, let's say if you're using Apex or similar to subflows, right? As much as possible, if you're using a certain functionality multiple times, you should be using a subflow for it, right? And then we also have to consider existing connectors. So as I mentioned, there's at least 26 right now for Mulesoft Composer, but there's actually so much more on the endpoint platform, mainly because it has been there for several years now. And it also contains connectors to, let's say, ERP system like SAP. So it's actually much more advanced. You also need to understand integration complexity. Are we talking about multiple different systems and connecting, grabbing data from, let's say, 5 different systems and then combining that and then doing something else, some other business logic based on that? So these are some of the considerations. And of course, data volumes and performance requirements. Do we need to be able to handle hundreds of thousands, millions of records, or do we also need to be able to have, let's say, a certain performance requirements for our integrations, right? So all of these are some of the capabilities of the endpoint platform. And in terms of the top use cases, so one of the ways that we're actually able to leverage this is if you actually need to transfer data from one org to another. So this is another option that you can use. So let's say if you have accounts with a certain criteria, you can then send that to another Salesforce org. So another option that many companies use is actually integrating with NetSuite and QuickBooks. So let's say opportunity data. Let's say we're talking about opportunity that got closed-won. We then send that data over to NetSuite or QuickBooks. And then with demo, so we can also use integration with Slack or Twilio for notification, right? So there are so many ways this can be used. So it's up to the different businesses to be able to leverage this. And then we'll be talking about considerations here. You may be familiar with Salesforce flows already, right? But it's actually currently not yet possible to trigger from Salesforce flows directly or from platform events. So remember, we're only listening for system events, so it could be from Salesforce, right? The way you actually address this, in a way, consideration is that you can actually, let's say, use a custom object, create a new record using Salesforce flows from that. But of course, it's not going to be close to real time, right, in terms of process. So once you create that new custom object record, you still need to wait up to 10 minutes for the Mulesoft Composer to pick that up and then do the processing. So just some consideration, but I believe they're actually working on this. So we'll see how it goes. And then one consideration here, you cannot reuse a composer flow yet for now. So in a way, let's say we built that composer, right? What if we also have another flow that reuses same logic? Currently, it's not yet possible, but I'm hoping sooner or later, they can use what we call webhooks. So meaning, if you're not familiar with webhooks, basically you can think about it as a URL that gets generated. What it does is it actually accepts data. So we could use, for example, HTTP requests, right? But that concept of using webhooks to trigger things is actually something that's available in other no-code solutions. So at least for me, I'm hoping that they'll be adding this sooner or later. And then currently, it's not yet possible to schedule it to run on a specific time of day that I mentioned, right? If you want it to run at 9 a.m. daily, you have to go in there at 9 a.m. and activate it during that time. And then I mentioned there's no lower environment for testing, meaning there's no concept of sandboxes. And one very important thing to take note is there's no concept of versioning 2. What you have to do actually is For those that have been building flows, you have multiple versions, right? So, but for this one, what you have to do is you actually have to go in and clone this one. So, very important thing is, of course, make sure to have naming convention. So, for example, clone this, you can name it version 1, version 2, version 3, if you actually still need it. All right. And then, because remember that it's actually running outside Salesforce. So whenever it's connecting to Salesforce, grabbing data, creating a new record, updating, it's actually going to be using an API call. So just something to consider. Let's say, especially, what if, let's say, you have an automation on the lead record. Whenever a new lead gets created, you want to do something. Be very, very careful about that, because somebody could import 100,000 leads and you could actually be using up all of your credits about that. So just something to consider. Make sure that you're careful about that. And as I mentioned, it's not technically real time. It gets the connector actually checks Salesforce for up to every 10 minutes. What they do is they try to do it as short as possible, but at the same time, that also is dependent on server resources.
Joey, thank you very much for your presentation. We are actually almost out of time, so
Yep.
I mean,
Sure.
if you have time, we can continue. But just wanted to
Yeah.
let you know.
Sure. I can. Go ahead.
Yeah. Go
sure.
ahead and continue.
Yep.
We still have some questions, and then we'll get to those.
Sure. And one very important thing is also compliance. So if you take note, let's say, depending on where you are, where your Salesforce instances, if you have any compliance requirements, since it's actually sending it to Mulesoft servers, you need to consider that, right, in terms of government requirements. So when not to use Mulesoft Composer. So whenever you need to integrate with on-premise systems, it's not something that's the best tool for the job. Implementing complex integrations or data transformation that require coding. So there's no option to actually do complex data transformations here. So high volume, bulk ETL data transfer. So, and then question is, how do you get access? So bad news for those that are not yet part of, let's say, a Salesforce or Mulesoft partner. So typically they're consultants. So this is something that's needed in order to get access. But there's actually for a 2-hour workshop that's Mulesoft provides. You could scan this QR code later on. I could send over the link too. But take note, right now, I believe we're still waiting for additional slots for this specific training because it started, I believe, December or November, but most of the slots got filled in within a day or two. So keep an eye on it. I'd recommend follow me on LinkedIn too. I'll make sure to post whenever there's a new slot. So I'm actually connected to the instructor here. So just make sure that to let you know, just in case this free 2-hour workshop opens up. And then this is actually the link. So there's actually a new Salesforce credential. Well, technically it's Mulesoft. So there's a new class that helps you with Mulesoft Hyper Automation Specialist. So this specific credential actually covers multiple different products. So it's talking about Salesforce flows, Salesforce orchestrator, and then flow orchestrator, and also the composer, the RPA, and the endpoint platform, and also the Einstein chatbot. So there's all of these different products that's available. And take note, I believe they only launched this specific class today. So, and also this credential, it was there as a beta period for the past month or two, but they actually only launched this today. So for those that are interested, you could look at it, this specific link, hyper automation course. I can send over this slides later on. And then there's also a trail mix for those that are interested in learning more. So there are different options about that. They also have videos on that. And then question about pricing. So there's what we call the Automation Everywhere bundle, or also called Mulesoft Automate. So this includes what he calls 57,000 credits. This can either be used for RPA or Composer. This is how we translate the credits. One Mulesoft credit can either be 2 RPA bot minutes and 100 RPA API calls. We won't have time to discuss this, but just to give an idea, basically RPA bot is basically something that runs to go through the different screens, right? Okay, step 1, fill out this form. Step 2, fill out the second page and then submit, something like that. So it actually is taking time. So that's part of the bot minutes. And then RPA API calls. So that's what's triggering the API. And then
that Composer line, is that the Salesforce Flow Composer?
Correct. Yes. 50 Composer tasks. So the way it's counted is each item that we do is called one Composer task. So let's say in our specific scenario, we connected with Twilio, right? So that's one task. We also connected with Slack. That's another task. So in a way, this is how it's counted. So you get 50. Let's say if you're purely just using Composer, 50 times 57,000. So that's around more than 2.5 million, right? So that's something that you can use. Of course, if somebody's loading a million records of lead and you have a trigger on that you'd want to be very careful just to make sure that you're not using up your 1 year worth of credits in one go, right? So, and then there's also the other option of using or at least buying only the Mulesoft Composer. So you have the option of using the Plus edition or the Starter edition, and these are the corresponding pricing, either $27,000 or $57,000 a year. For the most part, this actually provides a lot more value because most of the time, companies actually purchasing this would actually be considering all of these. Take note, these are the list prices. So depending on what you have, it may change. Of course, that pricing is mostly discussed with AEs. These are simply guidelines based on their current website. All right. With that, make sure if you're interested in learning more, make sure to join the Mulesoft Composer group, because this is where we have a lot of the different product managers and a lot of the community members, especially Isabella Navarro. She's actually really quite active in terms of Composer. If you have any questions about the product or what's coming up and things like that. So if you also have a request for a feature, you can actually send it here or go through the ideas exchange. With that, thank you again for having me. So
yeah, I'm
I
gonna
guess
go
we
to
can go through the
questions.
questions.
Yes, thank you so
go ahead.
much. My first question before I go to all the other questions, is there a skills shortage in this area? Do you want people to study and learn this?
I'd say there's not really a lot of people that know about this, although the learning curve in terms of understanding this depends on your experience. Of course, people that have built flows would have an advantage because, of course, in a similar way, just telling it, okay, what's the trigger point? What are the actions that you want to make? Of course, developers also have a big advantage in terms of already understanding how to deal with APIs, how do HTTP requests. But in a sense, in terms of learning, understanding this, I'd say at most within a few days, if you're really focused on this, it's something that you can easily learn, right? So you'll see that we created a demo within less than an hour.
You did, not us.
Yep. Yeah. Well, it's a collaborative.
You are the ninja.
Effort.
Okay, so Michelle is asking, can you share the deck? I think you already said you will share the deck. Can you share the deck with us? And then I'll transmit it. I'll send it to people. You don't need to worry about it now. So quick questions, because there are multiple. Now, one question is, when do we use Mulesoft Composer compared to Postman? I think they are talking about an event-based alternative. Is that what that question is about?
Yep. All right. That's a good question. So whenever we're talking about Postman, it's really meant for development and testing. So in a way, Postman is a tool to make it easier for you to test and validate APIs. In most cases, whenever we need to integrate with a system, we actually also use Postman ourselves. So just to make sure that whenever we send a request, we're expecting the proper data. So that's really used for development and testing. But once you want to make it live and want to make it for production, you then use Composer or any point or other options to do that. Does that help?
Okay. So Samuel, an XML question. I don't exactly understand what the question is here. Can you please
Sorry?
restate the question? Oh, not for you. I'm talking about the person who wrote down the question. They either come on, ask us, or restate the question. But Aditya asked a question: when to use Composer versus IFTTT in a non-Salesforce and low-code situation? Example: business users.
All right. For non-Salesforce or local situation, I haven't really explored IFTTT that much in the business context. I've actually used it way back, but mostly for just triggering something basic. I guess a big part of it is, of course, understanding security, where things go. And at the same time, for the most part, businesses are concerned about compliance too. So regarding that, I'm not sure if they have a business plan or some level of service level agreement. So that's something to consider. But it really depends. So I'm not sure about what connectors there are for IFTTT. But I know it sort of does something similar. But the main power of actually Composer is actually not just purely Composer. It's actually how it's meant to work with other automation tools within the Salesforce ecosystem. As I mentioned, RPA, endpoint platform, and also flows and orchestrator, right? So in that sense, you have to look at it holistically, not just purely the integration aspect of it. Hopefully
Yes.
that helps.
So next question, what I understand from the question is it's asking about the security and whether we need to be restricting the fields and objects. I guess in an ideal scenario, you would come from Mulesoft side to Salesforce with an API user, dedicated user or something. Is that how you would do it? And then you would give access to necessary fields, or is that how that works? How is the connection set up?
Yep. The best practice. Even if we're using Composer, we also need to be able to authenticate to Salesforce, right? So in the same way, whenever we're building integration, we should actually be having a dedicated integration user as a best practice. Of course, not all companies will have the necessary budget for that, but if we're talking about best practices, yes, you should be only giving the access that you need for that specific user and profile.
Awesome. And next question, does Composer support iframe automation, screen automation subtype with proprietary software or non-automation friendly situations?
That's meant for RPA, not Composer.
Okay. All right. So the question that I didn't understand, maybe it was my own limitation. It's rephrased now. Since Samuel uses XML, is that the reason we use auth? That's the question. You see that?
Regarding this one, you're basically talking about seems like a single sign-on, but at least for this, basically we usually use OAuth just to make sure that we don't need to store the passwords too, right? So at least for the options available currently on Composer, it's really actually mostly just the OAuth. So once you actually select, let me share my screen again. Once you select the specific connector that you want to use, it will actually prompt you to the different options. So let me just give an idea of how things look like. For example, if you want to add another Salesforce instance here, so add a new Salesforce connection. So connect. From here, you'll see that it creates a pop-up, right? So from there, you just have to log in. And then it will then process that connection and then save it in the background. Allow access. So it's actually this simple. You're basically just logging in. Hopefully that helps. I'm not sure if that addresses the question. So
Well, thank you very much, Joy. It was fantastic. I did not know a lot about this topic, and I'm quite interested. So hopefully, I can dive in. Just want to give everybody information about how we can share this information. I'm going to put this on the event page, but the event page on Bevy doesn't really send out a notification once I link and upload. So go back and check, or you can check our LinkedIn profiles, because we're going to be sharing the slide deck and as well the video on the YouTube channel, because Joey was kind enough to share it with us. Thank you very much, Joey.
Sure. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Thanks for
right.
the questions too.
Have a great day. Thank you. Thanks for joining, everybody. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you.